Welcome to the Sales Olympics, day 14. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Kirsten. Yes, Jonathan, you do dare to join me again. So I can see these comments in the waiting room as y'all are, as like basically the video is counting down. And Jonathan said, would I dare to join you again? I'm like, I don't know. Might kind of feel like that whenever he's hitting the water. Might feel good, might feel bad. Welcome, everyone, to Sales Olympics. This is going to be a day that's almost the antithesis of yesterday, hier, for Jonathan, anyone in the French-speaking crowd. So today I learned future simple in terms of French. I've been watching a ton of diving, that is diving and the synchronized swimming for the Olympics is what's on deck. And then, of course, running at night. But the topic for today is going to be equally as interesting, I hope, as diving in the Olympics. So this is going to be all of the questions that you should always ask. So yesterday we did all of the questions that you should never ask. So we did leading questions, self-diagnosis questions, subjective questions, and questions that basically ultimately are after manipulating them. Today, we're going to go into the questions that you should always ask. So you know what I'm going to ask. If everyone would jump in the chat, let me know who's here. Let me know where you're coming from. Gianluca, I think you're coming from Italy, if I get that correctly. I think Lori's here. She's probably still in Cape Cod, but we're going to jump in for today, and I'm going to do something wild today. I'm going to try and stay on time. So we're going to try and actually stick with the theme of the 4x400. So let's jump in for today. It's all the questions that you should always ask within Discovery for lap number 1. Okay, lap number 1, goal of the questions. So all the questions that I'm asking in Discovery, I want you to think of the game. I don't know if anyone's ever seen the game Guess Who, but this was the moment that it really cemented for me how to go about asking Discovery and what the actual goal is. So whoever who hasn't played Guess Who, I was playing with my little niece, Kate. And the goal of Guess Who is both players basically have 100 cards that are facing towards them of people. And then each player has one card facing them of who the other person is supposed to guess. And you get to take turns asking questions. And I started looking at how she was asking questions. And she was asking questions like, does the person have a hat? Does the person, have brown hair, for instance? And so I asked her mid-game, I said, so she asked me a question about, does a person have a hat? And I said, no, they don't. And she said, yes. And she starts flopping a whole bunch of cards down. And I said, Kate, if you don't mind me asking, I was like, why do you say yes? She's like, because that nails out a lot of the wrong possibilities, Ampy. So I think that I'm going to win. So my push is, she's 7 at the time. So to have the same North Star as her, of like, I need to nail out all of the wrong possibilities. So the way that I'm asking questions is to nail out the wrong possibilities and figure out what the true diagnosis is. So the goal of asking the questions is only 2 things: to diagnose what's accurate so that you can push to the top things that they believe that aren't true, which is a misdiagnosis. So I misprescribed that I need an extender, or a misdiagnosis, something they missed entirely. So the goal of all of the questions, the turns that you have in the game, is to ask a question that will help you nail out what is true and what is not true, so you could add value to the buyer. So there's a number of different elements within that. We have, just as a reminder, business problem, tactical problem, root cause, current impact, persona impact, current horizontal impact, and current vertical impact. Then we have future horizontal impact, future vertical impact, and future persona impact. And we have current event triggers and future event triggers. So I'm going to go into what all those are, but basically I'd be asking questions to size up whatever those are. So for the business problem, for instance, that's always tied to the person's lagging indicator. So if the person's lagging indicator, let's go an example that everyone knows. So let's say that the lagging indicator is closed won. It's a salesperson. So the business problem is going to be simply put, what is the current state and what is the actual goal for that lagging indicator? So the two questions that I would have to ask is, what is your quota? What is your quota attainment so far? And I've got the size of the business problem. Tactical problem is going to be anything that's around a leading indicator. So there's a real-time metric, but not the final one. So a great example would be conversion from stage 1 into stage 2, conversion from stage 2 into a proposal and into closed won. So I'd be asking questions like, what is your conversion percentage from stage 1 to stage 2? What is your conversion percentage from SQL to closed won? What is your sales cycle? If you don't mind me asking, how often are you discounting and how much? How often are people no-showing on you? What's the percentage of no-show from stage to stage? So you start to get a good measure on where is the potential churn of clients within the actual sales cycle, so that you can find out what is the leading indicator that you hypothetically would need to change. And then the questions around the leading indicator, or the root cause, is going to be simply around the inputs that they're putting in. So how often are you following up with a prospect? How quickly are you following up post demo? When someone's coming on for a multi-thread, do you send an email ahead of time? What does that email look like? Can you show me an example of your discovery call? You look for how many questions are they asking? Are they cutting a buyer off? Are they adding any value? Are they finding anything that they don't know? How many leading questions are they asking? Self-diagnosis questions are they asking? Are they asking subjective questions like, do you have a good open rate? Are they looking for digital problems like, do you have an open rate problem? They're like, yes, and then they shut down. Anytime I give my people that I coach the KPI that anytime the prospect talks and says something, if they talk after that, as opposed to asking a question, they owe me $500. Y'all are going to be like, Becc is the worst coach of all time. I'm like, I want you to imagine that if you talk, they say something, your job is to ask a question. They ask a question, your job is still to ask a question. So if they say anything on this recorded call, next call, and you start talking about something, you owe me $500. If you start talking about your products, generally speaking, you owe me $750. And if you mention your company name and go into a case story, you owe me $1,000 for every single time that you do it. So turn around the calls. They're like terrified. The point being, the leading indicator questions that I'd be asking is around those actual variables. Now, the goal, again, this is around the portion of the goal. So the goal is, how do I find something that they didn't know? And how do I find something that they believe that's not true? So let's say that I say, what is your, can you show me an example of a discovery call? And they send it over to me. And usually I say, can you give me what you liked about this call, what you think you did well, and what you think that you could work on? And it's so enlightening to me, because a lot of times people will be like, what I did really well was next steps. What I didn't do well was, I could have dug for pain a little bit more. Like, the thing that I noticed is what you did well was you jumped on the call. What you missed was you didn't find any of the problems that they have today. So what I'm asking to discover that, because they don't know, because they shouldn't know, because they're not the expert here. So I'm saying, can you give me an example of a discovery call? That's la prof numéro un. So basically the two goals of the questions. So I put those in my mind of the two goals are to find things that they don't know and find things that they believe that aren't true that are hurting them because they are. So an example in this case was they believe that they should be demoing and discovering in the same call. That they believe that discovery is all about just finding the problem that the person wants to solve. They believe that they should ask impact questions like, what's the impact to you? Or what are the ripple effects? All these self-diagnosis questions. So those are the misdiagnosis. So to find out what they believe and find out what truly is underneath that, I'm like, can you give me an example of your discovery call? For SDRs, I'm like, can you give me an example of the cold emails that you're sending? Can you tell me your open rate? Can you tell me your reply rate? Can you What's your quota? It's on SQLs. What's it based on? What's an SQL? What's the number? How many are you at to date? How long has that been going on? All historically, did that just start happening? What changed? What has changed from an event perspective? I'd be like, they just move into this role? Do they just become a team lead? How's their activity panned out over time? So I'm asking the questions with the goal of, you're trying to find things that they believe that aren't correct, and the second goal of finding things that they didn't know that they existed at all. That's lap number 1. Okay, let's go into lap number 2. There's only 2 types of questions. It's gonna be a short lap. There's only 2 types of questions. Questions that they learned something afterwards that they didn't know beforehand, and questions that they didn't learn something that they didn't know beforehand. And I need both. I need to ask both within Discovery to do my job. But I would weigh in the conversation, how often am I asking things that they don't learn anything new, so that you prevent them from shutting down in the conversation? So the first part that they have to know is your agenda to help them. But the second part they have to know is, are you able to help them even though that's your agenda, right? So we've gone ad nauseum into the first part. So the second part of, can you actually help them? So the 2 types of questions, they learn something new or they don't learn something new. So I'm going to give you all an example. Gianluca, if I were to say, what sales engagement platform do you use? Or how many people are on your team? When you're answering me, and anyone can jump into this, would you learn anything new about yourself whenever you're answering me? Yes or no? So the question that I'm asking is, how many people are on your team, and what sales engagement provider are you using? Would you learn anything new when you were answering that question, or no? So he said Apollo. And then how many people are on your team? And no. So James nailed it. No, he's not learning anything new that he didn't know beforehand. So that is an example of a non-value question. Now, I need that answer to stack up into a diagnosis sometimes. However, I'm keeping in my mind that I can't rattle off 5 or 10 of those right off the bat, or sequentially and with each other, because then the person gets starved out, in terms of they don't know where you're going, or they don't know if you can add any value. So second question, Gianluca, if I were to say, or this is open to everyone, and this is an example. If I were to say, what's your open rate? And you say, my open rate is 20%. Oddly enough, that's oddly a question that teaches people something. Sometimes they don't know. But the second question I'd ask is, okay, got it. So out of the 80% that aren't opening your emails, how many of them are receiving your email? So Justin, I'm going to ask you that question. Let's say that your open rate's 20%. I'm like, got it. So out of the 80% that aren't opening your emails, what percentage of them are actually getting the email into their primary inbox? Would that teach you something that you didn't know? Or would that not teach you something that you didn't know? I want people to jump in the chat. Yes, it would teach them something that he didn't know. Or no, it wouldn't teach them something that he didn't know. Probably, if you were asked that. Good question. And why is it a good question, Gianluca? What does it make you think about? I'm going to put you all on trial here. Deliverability is not acceptable in this session. So why was it a good question? Justin, what did it teach you? So he said yes. What did it teach you? What did that question teach you? I said, hey, so what's your open rate? You're like 20. And I'm like, got it. So out of the 80 who aren't getting who aren't opening the email, how many of them are actually getting them? What did that question make you start to think about and teach you? Yeah. They start to think, maybe I have a deliverability issue. Is that the reason why they're not actually? Yeah, James nailed it. Maybe I have a deliverability issue. Is that the reason that people aren't opening my emails? Is that the reason that I'm behind quota? Is that the reason why we can't get anything across the board? Is that the reason what's behind the reply rate? So it teaches someone something that they didn't know, high likelihood. These are the best types of questions because you're combining two things. There are questions that help you diagnose things that they didn't know. And then there are questions that help them realize or teaches them that they didn't have, that they have a problem that they didn't know. And then there's questions that do both. This is a good example of both. Here's another example. If I were to say, okay, correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, looks like you have, or Gianluca, you gave me your rep total. So I'm like, let's just pretend. I'll go back to you, Justin. So it looks like you have, correct me if I'm wrong, looks like you have 10 people on your team. Let's just say it's true. I'm like, who's your top performer? And you're like, Gianluca. I'm like, got it. So what is Gianluca saying on the cold calls, on his cold calls, that's making all these people close and book meetings that the rest of your team isn't? What would that teach you about yourself? So they'll usually give me an answer. They're like, well, I think Gianluca, he just knows our buyer persona better. And he works really hard, and I feel like he's really personal, but they're thinking one thing the entire time that they're answering me. I want to see if anyone can guess what they're thinking. So I asked them the question of, who's your top performer? They're like, Gianluca. I'm like, got it. So what's Gianluca saying on cold calls that's making all of these prospects book meeting? What are the phrases that he's using in making prospects book meetings that the rest of everyone else isn't? So, and they start to answer me, but they're realizing something as they answer me. Yes, they're realizing Gianluca's a goat. What else are they realizing? He knows you. Okay, yeah. They start to talk through it, and they'll start to give me some kind of self-diagnosis answer. They're like, oh, well, I just think that he calls a lot more. He knows our buyer, but something's coming to their brain the entire time. Yes, Jonathan got it. They're realizing that they don't know. Kirsten got it. Lori got it. They're like, I don't know. And if I did know, I could replicate that onto everyone else who wasn't at quota. So those are the two types of questions. Now, full disclosure, you need both, right? You need both types of questions, meaning I need some questions that they did know the answer. Like a good example is like, okay, what's your weight? What's your height? But then I need some questions that they didn't know the answer. What's your cholesterol? And I need some questions in there that in the moment, add no value at all, right? So I need to know how many emails they're sending per day. Hypothetically, they'll know that. I need to know if they're using a sales engagement platform or if they're not. I need to know how many reps that they have on their team. I need to know, who are the buyer personas that they're pursuing. I need to know their account limits that I'm like, they're going to SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. And I'm like, what's enterprise? They're like 5,000 people plus. And I'm like, got it. What's mid-market? 1,000 to 5,000 people. I'm like, got it. So SMB is below 1,000? Yes, it is. That didn't teach them anything that they didn't know. But I need some of those questions to stack up into a bigger diagnosis that they didn't know. So if I'm like, okay, on your demo request process, looks like you have a demo request process button on your website. Are you round robining those leads, or how are you going about those leads? Yeah, I'm round robining them. They didn't know anything, or they didn't learn anything. I'm like, okay, so what happens on weekends when I request a demo on the weekend? They're like, well, we follow up on Monday. They learned a little something. They're like, crap, I didn't think about that. We wait until we follow up until Monday. I'm like, okay, and once they get on the call, what are they asking for? And they're like, oh, well, they're roughly asking, is this the right person? I'm like, are they bank questions? And they're like, yeah, it's authority, budget, need, and timeline. They didn't really learn anything that they didn't know. But all three of those questions help me know that they are likely churning 95% of their leads from their inbound process alone. If you're round robining, if you're taking it to another channel like email, if you're waiting until Monday, if you're emailing anytime after 5 minutes of when they've requested a demo, if you're not letting them schedule on a site, if you're making them jump on a 15-minute call and then passing to another AE, you're churning 95% of your leads on demo request process. So let's argue 35% of them are unqualified. That's 60% of your leads. They would have a 35% conversion to close one versus a 6% conversion for outbound. Plus, 70% of the time, people are going to close with the vendor that gets back to them first. So I need to ask all three questions so they don't really learn anything that they didn't know. But that's to find out a whomper of something that they didn't know. So those are the two types of questions. So the point of this section is I wouldn't rush in with 15 situational questions that they already know, right? I want to pepper in ones where they do learn something that they didn't know, or I want to pepper in statistics that I'm like, yeah, how many meetings are they booking per month? They're like, it's garbage. I'm like, what's garbage? If you don't mind me asking. They're like 3 meetings per month. I'm like, well, actually, industry average is 2. And that's including inbound, and yours is strictly outbound. So you're actually a little higher than normal. And I'm like, but on that piece on email, so let me ask you a question. And then I change the topic, but I give them a piece of value as statistic. So the point is to keep both of these questions in your head, types of questions, and gauge their level of how much value they've received early on in the call, later on in the call. And so you're gauging throughout the call of, I don't want to wait for all the candy till the end. So one of the biggest things that's broken about the tipping industry is tipping actually at the beginning was stood for to ensure promptness. So people would pay a tip at the beginning of the meal to ensure that the waiter or the waitress came back and waited on them quickly, right? So they're like, I'm going to give you some money so that you'll wait on me fast. But now we tip at the end of the meal. So the person doesn't know who to give good service to because they're like, okay, I don't know if this person's going to tip me well or not tip me well. So when your prospect's going through discovery, if you hold up all that value throughout the entire discovery and you're finding a whole bunch of things that they didn't know, but you're not letting them know any of those benchmarks or statistics or questions that make them, realize they have a problem that they didn't know, and you wait until the end, heaven forbid you wait till a second call to do it, they don't know if they're actually going to get value. You got to keep in mind their experiences with sellers that they don't. So I would give them what I call pieces of candy. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that Family Guy episode where he's trying to get James Wood upstairs and he's like puts pieces of candy all up the stairs. That's how I view it. That I'm like, okay, I'm going to filter in some pieces of candy, either some questions that help them understand that something that they didn't know, but it can't be a question that they don't, that you don't need for diagnosis. I still need that open rate for diagnosis. It can't be strictly for the purpose of getting them to think in a certain way, right? It can't ever be for that goal. But I would give them at least a couple benchmarks or they learn something along the way so that they understand like, hey, this is going to be worth it to go through this 30 minutes of investment. Okay, men, lap 3. You have not been good about keeping me on time. Thank you, Lori. To ensure promptness. And now we do it at the end. So what bartenders do, not that I was a bartender. I was a bartender for a few years. It was a tough life. And what bartenders do is when they go to another bar, they'll order one drink and then they'll pay in cash, but they'll tip really heavy on that first drink. So it'll be like $5 for the first drink. And then they open a tab. So the bartender knows like, oh, okay, they're going to tip me out well. So I'm going to go to this person first and every single time. Trick of the trade. I don't even go out anymore. I don't even drink. I'm a loser now. One day I was cool, y'all. Okay, stay on topic. Okay, third piece, questions that help you diagnose. So we covered business problem, tactical problem, and root cause. So you basically just need to Google what are their lagging, leaning, and leading indicators. You need to figure out at what point, what's the industry average, and then you need to figure out at what point do they cause a problem. That's the first steps before you ask these. Then when you're asking the questions, you're just asking a question of what those indicators are specific. So you can see, is there pain? Is there a lot of pain? What is, where are they at in comparison with other people? And are they past the point of where it causes a problem? So if I ask open rate, then I'm like, okay, anything under, I would argue 50, and they're going to have a business problem if they're missing quota. Industry average is 20 to 25. So if they answer 30, I'm like, they're above industry average, but they still have a deliverability issue, and they're still probably not at quota. If they answer with 5, I'm like, they're definitely not at quota, and there's definitely a deliverability issue. They're probably blacklisted. If they say it's 60, I'm like, I don't really buy it. Let's go into sales engagement. I want to look through this, because sometimes people hybrid at the top. What sales engagement does is it hybrids at the top of like your open rate and your reply rate, but it falsely combines anytime that you make a call and you log a disposition of that call, if like left a voicemail, it counts that. So usually when I go into my client's open rate and reply rate, they're like, our open rate's bad. It's 40%. I'm like, it's probably half that. I'm like, can you share your screen and show me basically the cadence? And then we go through and we add up all the open rates of the email. And they're like, why is it 21, 19, 17, 16, 23, and 5? But it says my average open rate is 40. I'm like, right, because it's double as high. So definitely something that I would suggest. But point being, if they're like, it's 60, I'm like, yeah, it's not 60, but let's check. And if it is 60, I'm like, well, they probably have email deliverability covered and yada, yada, yada. So you're asking in business problem, tactical problem, and root cause, you're asking the question of just what is the finite point of that indicator. So for CX, for instance, how quickly are you reaching out? Can you show me the message that you're reaching out with? What is your first time call resolution rate? What is your problem resolution rate? What is your NPS score? What is your renewal? What is your renewal goal? Are you KPI'd on renewal, cross-sell, and upsell? Yes on cross-sell, but no on, or yes on upsell, but no on cross-sell. I'm like, so you get the whole percentage every time upsell? Is it past 6 months? Is it right away? What is that quota? Where are you at? So I'm sizing up those pieces. That's for business problem, tactical problem, and root cause, which is where you're really going to gain credibility, is tactical problem and root cause, when you can find out things that they didn't know, especially for the problem that they came in for. Because if they came in for the problem, business problem, people usually have a good knack on, because they know where they're at and they know what their goal is, typically speaking. People know what their GPA is and they know what they need it to be, to get financial support, for instance. What they don't know is tactical problems and root causes. So I spent a lot of times asking questions there. So for instance, for like a diet, for instance, or like, let's stick on the education. You're like, how many hours are you studying per week? What are the books that you're using to study? Do you have a tutor or do you not have a tutor? What are your quiz rates? What are your test rates typically? Can you show me the spread of all of them? So if they tell me something of like, yeah, so for instance, they're like, yeah, so I'm studying like 3 hours a day. How are you studying? I'm studying with Rosetta Stone for French. They'd be like, oop, that doesn't hit pronunciation. So I bet that she's got a pronunciation issue. I'd be like, can you read these couple of words right here? I'd be like, yep, she has a pronunciation issue. So that's where I'm finding those tactical problem and root causes they didn't know, is by asking questions around those finite limits. But you have to know first, what is the level that normally causes a problem for them, right? For the impact questions. So business problem is their lagging indicator, the delta between where they are and where they need to get. Impact is what happens to them because of that. And usually there's the same types of impacts. Look at that guy in the background. Types of impacts for your persona. Meaning if I'm missing my quota, then I'm likely going to go on a PIP. So I'm like, how long have you been missing quota? What is this delta? And if they've been missing quota for 6 months, I'd be like, they're probably on a PIP. I'm like, what are the is there any kind of performance plan that's put into place at any certain given point in time? And they're like, yeah, it's going to happen in a month if I don't hit this metric, basically, so that you can understand a current impact. Now, horizontal impacts and vertical impacts is where you're going to find a lot of unknowns, right? All they're thinking about is their world, but they're not thinking about the people that it affects, right? Necessarily. But here's the thing. If I am missing, if I have a bunch of critical bugs in my product and that affects the sales team's ability to sell, if it affects them in such a big way, that VP of sales and that marketer over at CrowdStrike, they're going to make a move to get me let go, because I'm the problem. It's my business problem that's causing them to have the impact, right? So anytime you find a horizontal impact or a vertical impact, that's when you're going to add to basically the pile of things that they don't know, and you're going to grow the size of that problem. So the questions that you would ask would be around the indicators for the horizontal and vertical roles to the person. What's learned a lot for? This especially happens with open rates. It's number one. Yeah, it's generally shown higher than the actual number. Yeah. So I know this is for a salesperson, but you can apply it to any persona. The developer case, again, I'm like, how many critical bugs have you had prehistorically? What is the goal of critical bugs for your products? How many products are you supposed to release? How many products have you done so far? How many lines of code does each product take? How many bugs were non-critical in the pre-existing products? That would be a winner for unknowns. How much reusable code are you using? How much of your code is reusable? So like there's 10,000 lines and usually there's 5 pots of lines that are reusable. What's your reuse code percentage rate? Well, we're only reusing it 10% of the time. Why, if you don't mind me asking? Well, because it takes too much time to surface it. So it's basically faster to just create a net new. Okay, how often can you use that in the next 5 product launches that you have? Meaning, how hypothetically, how much that pre-existing code are you having to write from scratch? And they're like 25%. I'm like, oop, I just found an unknown. They're going after weight loss. They need to lose 25 pounds. I'm like, how many calories are you eating in a day? I'm roughly eating around 2,000. Can you walk me through what the average diet is? So like, I'm eating 3 baguettes. Not that this applies to anyone, but I'm eating 3 baguettes and then I'm eating some candy. This is literally just yesterday. I'm eating baguettes and candy. And I'm like, okay, so are you eating any adult food? Real people food? Are you eating any iron? How much iron and protein are you eating throughout the day? Are you eating any meat? No, I'm a vegetarian. Okay, are you eating any vegetables or just candy? Typically just candy. Okay, but I'm eating a little bit of vegetables. How many vegetables? There's a couple of bell peppers in this risotto mix that I eat, or this couscous mix that I eat. And I'm like, cool. So thanks. It says LinkedIn user and it says nice diet. I'm going to take that as a win. This is literally, I'm walking you through my diet. Then I'm like, oh, okay. They want to lose 25 pounds. Their calories are at, let's say 1,400 per day. They run a lot. But what they're missing is they're not including any iron in that diet. So if they were to eat 400 calories of iron, of like protein, as opposed to bullshit candy, by way of example, then that would probably trim their calories to 1,200 as opposed to 1,400, because they'd be fuller longer because of the protein that was put in there. That's something that they didn't know, right? So when I find these unknowns, and there are unknowns everywhere, like we're going to go into them in the last episode, but keep in mind, if you just call on Friday afternoon and Thursday afternoon from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. and send your emails then, you'll probably 3 or 4x your conversion. If you're scheduling your meetings in the morning for your prospects versus the afternoon, if you change that to just scheduling them to the afternoon, you'll probably 2 to 3x your held meeting rate. If you 4 connects is average for 40 cold calls per day that the average prospector makes. So I would go in and look at the activity metrics that your reps are using and when and where. If they're sending them Monday, I would just get them to stop. If you have same subject lines, almost every person I've seen has the same subject line for every single email, which is going to cause a deliverability issue like mayhem. So I just go back through and look for all the subject lines that my reps have. And I'm like, it doesn't have to just be a different subject line for every single email, like meaning as a template. It means that every template that you send out has to have a different subject line. So I'm like, can you show me the last 100 emails that your reps have written? And it's like, optimize SEO, optimize SEO, optimize SEO, optimize SEO. I'm like, oh, here's another one. If you have an SQL criteria that the AEs are accepting what's qualified or not qualified, and it's based on any kind of subjective criteria like need or timeline or, authority, then you basically have no data and to close what's close won, because they're going to accept the opportunity based on if they think they can close it. So they're just going to blame it on it went dark or it wasn't the right person. So what needs to be trued up to is like actual level of title. Was this director plus? Was this, a certain amount of employees, for instance, that are the criteria that you can't sell into? They didn't have the CRM that we need. But need, you create the need when you find it in discovery, which is the job of an AE. But they're never going to tell you that they didn't do their job. So I asked the question, what's the SQL criteria set on? How many days before closed one was an opportunity created on average? What are the differences between what AE 1, 2, and 3 accepted from the same lead pot? Sometimes I've seen a swing as big as 90. One rep was accepting 95% of the opportunities. One rep was only accepting 5. Why? It's on subjective criteria. So they have an incentive to disqualify. So that's a problem that most people don't know about. The demo request problem, 9% of people who request a demo were very likely to close, especially if you get back to them fast enough, are being followed up with, are getting a first call with an AE. So there are unknowns all over the place. So how I would find them is Google the metrics, Google at what point do they cause a problem, Google the industry averages, and then like you're after those questions in discovery. I'm like, what's your open rate? What's your reply rate? You could either ask the leading indicator questions or the leading indicator questions. Usually I leave the lagging indicator questions to the end. I can tell you about what your height, weight, or weight gain proportion is based on what you're eating and how much you're working out. I can about tell you how many meetings you're producing per month. If you were to show me an example of the email, open rate, reply rate, activity metrics, like I can guess around the industry average, which is now most people are creating on outbound per month 3 SQLs. And that's usually with 2 inbound included. It's usually 1 per month. So I'm like, I'm going to be nice. And let's say maybe it's 5. That's probably about where they are. But until I ask all these questions, I don't know the finite amount. So when I'm rushing in discovery, I'm looking for hotbeds, especially with customers that pass and been like, I had no idea. And I'm asking questions to them. Marker, y'all. I'm so proud of myself. I so appreciate how you mix it. Thank you very much, Robert. Well, here's the thing. I got the feedback in some cases, which I understood. They're like, well, we want a non-sales buyer, Becc. Like, yeah, this makes sense for you because you're in sales. So they're like, do another buyer. And I'm like, okay, I'll do a marketer. And it's like, yeah, but that's too close. And I'm like, okay, I'll do HR. And then I start challenging myself. I'm like, I'm going to go into IT director, CIO, CTO. I did EL coordinators yesterday, which is basically coordinators for English as a second another language program. And I'm like, it's on pass rate. Only 30% of people pass a English as a second another language course. And then there's also coaches and specialists that basically focus on, did they pass math? Let's put the English aside. Did they pass the actual math subject? The point being, it's taught me a lot. CFO is gross profit margin. HR is an employee churn. Customer success is renewal. So it's the Skittles that keeps me sharp and on track. I agree. I ran out of Skittles last night, Kirsten. So that's why I'm a little off track today. Not much, but a little. But point is, the only steps are find those KPIs. Here's a last thing that I'll say, because someone ran into it yesterday. I was on the line with somebody yesterday, and they had gone into Chat GPT, and they had looked for the metrics there. Chat GPT is like listening to me. It's like Siri, it's going to shut down the internet. We'll get it wrong. They'll get some of them sort of right, but they will never give you an actual list. They told me the SDRs are metric primarily on closed one. I'm like, no, they're not. So my suggestion would be, yes, you can Chat GPT it if you want, but I would just go to Google and say KPIs for director of product, KPIs for UX designer, KPIs for so on and so forth, engineering, platform engineering, whatever it is. And they'll usually give you a head of like 20 articles. And I would look through all of those articles and they'll usually have about 20 to 25, and I compile them onto a list and then go to a buyer that's not a customer and ask them only, if you can only save one of these metrics, which one would you save? And they're like, this one. I'm like, that's their lagging indicator. And do it for like 4 or 5 buyers. Then ask them, okay, what are the ones behind that? Okay, are there any that you don't worry about at all on this list? And are there any that you think that we should add? So I would start there of like, okay, now I'm confident that I have the metrics that they actually care about when I go across 4 or 5 people. And then I just make a doc and I put the averages next to them of like, what's the average gross profit margin? What's the average debt to equity ratio? What's the average cash on hand or cash flow for CFOs and accountants? Or I had a legal ops and legal buyer persona, or I had procurement the other day. So procurement is measured on the amount, percentage of the time, and full volume that they get outside vendors to discount. That's why you hear procurement rushing in and saying like, can you discount? Because it's one of their KPIs. It is, if you want someone to care about something, match their wallet to it, match their progress to it in terms of a buyer persona. So I'd start there. And when you're in discovery, especially for those unknowns that are Whompers, that you're like, this is a root cause that people typically don't know. And you'll get to know them over time. Like when the person's like, really? Hey, will you send that thing over? So almost after every discovery, they're like, can you send over those tips you were talking about on email deliverability? So it helps me reaffirm, typically people in this buyer persona don't know about that issue. So then every buyer persona, I'm rushing in there. Now there's an odd off case. They don't have a deliverability issue, but it's very likely that they do. And the time of day and the no-shows and you'll start to stack them up as you go so that you have 5, 10, 15 unknowns that you're after during discovery per persona. So that's everything. I wasn't completely on time. When I listen to you and how easily you go with discovery, qualification, and questioning, I feel I need to change jobs. Jonathan. Hey, if it makes you feel any better, I was listening to something in French today just before this with my coach, and I made him slow it down to 50%. So Jonathan will swap. You teach me Francais, and it's a skill like any doctor. You have to know. You don't just turn on a light switch and learn French. You don't just turn on a light switch and become a doctor and a good doctor. You become better and better and better and better and better over time. And how you do that is learning more every time. So if you didn't learn something yesterday that you didn't know the day before, it was a wasted day. That's how I'd look at it. So I'd push myself to learn one thing about my buyer that I didn't know today, control the input, learn one thing today that you didn't know about them yesterday. So an example is most deals, 82% close on Tuesday. Will my buyer actually need that fact? No, not necessarily. But I'm like, eventually those facts, stats add up. They start cumulative knowledge, to where you can become more deadly and more deadly for your buyers in the room. That's everything. Thanks so much for coming. Jonathan, I hope you continue to come. I didn't open in French today because I saw you were on the line, full disclosure. Justin, Gianluca, Kirsten, Mari, Lori, everyone in here. I mean, here's the thing. I overheard Min saying some of your names because he's putting together some metal. He's getting pretty pumped about closing ceremonies is all I'm going to say. So I will see you tomorrow, hopefully, if you come back. Tomorrow is a good one. Please come tomorrow. Hi, Ibrahim. Native French speaker. Y'all have to help me. Tomorrow is a really, really fun one. Tomorrow is how to challenge. So it does come down to the how. And from a psychological perspective, I would read a book by Robert Keegan called The Evolving Self. And he goes into the 5 different selves. And the punchline is that the second self is the one that you would be anywhere from 6 to 16 years of age, that your parents are going to shut down. And this is where challenging lies. So if you challenge someone outright from a psych view, you're dead. They won't listen to it. So tomorrow we're going to go into the 4 steps of an easy process of how you can challenge. Great to see you all. Bye, Federico. Bye, Kirsten. Gianluca, as always, toujours. À demain. And merci pour tout. Au revoir pour maintenant. The evolving self. Yes, Robert Keegan. I'll see you tomorrow.